All right, hey everybody, we are going to continue with part 2 of our bass clef lesson. So we are going to take a moment here at the beginning to review through the things that we talked about in our last lesson. We're talking about our line note strategies and our space note strategies. Then we're going to start digging into the notes that come outside of the bass clef. So not only do we have those 5 lines and 4 spaces, but we do have the notes that come on the top and the bottom, along with a couple of ledger line notes, just like on treble clef. Now, we are going to be working on identifying these different pitches and things like that. Don't forget about the treble clef because we will be using that soon, okay? So, to quote Mr. Brucker, let's go ahead and get after it and see what we are doing here. So, when placed on the staff, the bass clef symbol is going to line up with the 4th line. This is to really just help you get used to seeing where this bass clef is going to go on the staff. It is important to know where it belongs because it does help us to identify those notes in the right place. So if we draw the bass clef in a different spot, technically speaking, it would change what those pitches were. Now, if you're going to do a composition, which we're not doing right now, and you happen to draw the bass clef on the, let's say, the 3rd line, but you write all the other notes correctly, does that really make a whole lot of difference? No, not really. But if you're talking about writing a legitimate composition, if you're talking about writing something that, another musician would end up playing, you will need to make sure that you know where that goes. So that's kind of why we're talking about here, it lines up on that 4th line. Now, although we're using a new clef, the staff itself doesn't change. As we discussed, it still has 5 lines and 4 spaces. And again, with the treble clef, just like that, the bass clef uses ledger lines as well. Like I said, we are going to get to those later in this discussion and kind of learn what's going on with those. So continuing to review here, we do have the pitches on the bass clef working from bottom to top. Sorry about my dog here. He happens to be roaming around a little bit. So if you hear his paws tapping in the background, I apologize. But either way. So we always work from bottom to top. Now, if we don't work from bottom to top, these strategies will no longer work. So we must make sure that we start at the bottom and we move upward toward the top. The 5 lines receive the pitches G, B, D, F, and A. To make that easier, we use that strategy, great big dragons fly around. Now you can take your hand staff. I like to use the left hand for this because if you're a piano player, the left hand is playing those notes that are down in the bass clef. So I like to use my left hand for this, and you can take that and go, great big dragons fly around, giving you that tactile response, that touch response, so you can remember that that's what's going on there. All right? So moving on here, we go on to our space notes. Again, we work from bottom to top. We have to make sure we do that. The 4 spaces have the pitches A, C, E, and G. And to remember that, we are going to touch in the between our fingers, and we're going to go all cows eat grass on that left hand. All right? So if we continue on here, we're going to go outside the staff now. So in addition to the pitches that are on the staff, there are pitches outside that are useful. Now, just like on treble clef, could you extend this staff up and down really, really far? Absolutely, you could. It's not really that functional, though. Honestly, with bass clef, they're not really, the pitches that we're learning about aren't really pitches that you can even perform using your own voice. But that's okay. So moving on here anyway, the pitches outside the staff don't have a fancy nickname. We're not talking about crawl space or downstairs or gutter or any of that sort of stuff. We kind of just have to memorize the letter, which is okay, not a big deal. In addition to the 2 pitches directly at the top and the bottom of the staff, there are ledger lines that extend that staff up and down. That's a review of what the ledger line definition is. And the treble clef does the same thing. Ledger lines function the same on the treble clef as they do on the bass clef. So the ledger lines serve to make the staff larger and more functional for the instruments and voices that use it. Okay? So let's go above the staff first. You'll see that right there. I left it highlighted in blue this time. Most of the time you're not going to see notes highlighted in blue. They'll just be black ink. But I chose to leave it highlighted in blue to make it a little bit more apparent for you. So we do have those line and space, but we move outside the staff and continue adding pitches. Sitting at the top, we're going to have the pitch B, or high B. Now, this might be a little bit different from what you might have learned with the treble clef stuff, but remember, we're going to box those treble clef things up and we're going to just put them on the shelf for right now. So that high B right there, we've got that pitch sitting at the very top of the staff. It is our high note on the bass clef, that B up above the staff. Now, if we move to the ledger line, we see here that we've got that blue one. The ledger lines extend the staff up and down. Above the staff, the ledger line notates the pitch C. And this particular C is called middle C. Now, this might throw your brain off a little bit, and you're thinking, whoa, wait a minute. When we learned about treble clef, C is below the staff. How can we have C going above the staff? The answer, my friends, is because bass clef and treble clef are only separated by one note. And that's that middle C right there. So even though it's called middle C, it still goes above the bass clef because it's between the two staves. So that's something called the grand staff, which we're going to talk about later on. We're not going to worry about that at the moment. But what I want you to start to remember is that right there is your middle C up above the bass clef. It's in the same location on the treble clef. You still have it down below the staff. But on the bass clef, it sits above. Okay? So far above the staff, we've got that high B sitting at the very top of the staff, and then we move up to middle C. Let's go to the other side of the staff, shall we? So outside the staff pitch is going below the staff. Now, as we remember our lessons from previously, the lower on the staff you go, the lower the pitch is going to be. So these notes are at the very bottom of the bass clef. That makes them some very low sounding pitches. So the one that rests immediately below the staff is F, and that is our low F. So the adjective that we use is low F. Now, if you're thinking about this, and I want to kind of take a little bit of a time out here. When I was talking about the note B, I referred to it as high B. Now, why would I do that? Because it's sitting at the top of the staff, and even though bass clef is typically low pitches, they are still able to be higher or lower compared to one another. So just like any other interval, just like high versus low on treble clef, high versus low exists on the bass clef as well. Okay? So that's why we have our high B at the top and our low F down there at the bottom. So going to one more here, we're going to go to another ledger line down below the staff. Now, this particular pitch, like it says here, is very low, and it's pretty much guaranteed to be outside the range of your voice. To be entirely honest with you, it's outside the range of my voice most of the time. And when I'm speaking, I mean, my voice isn't super low. I'm not like a super bass down here at the very bottom all the time. No, none of that. But my voice is reasonably low pitched. Now, with this note, it is more useful for things like the piano or the tuba or the bass trombone or the bassoon and things like that. So even though you're not playing instruments yet, having a good awareness of where this pitch is super important, because very soon, for my 5th graders, and a little bit longer, but for my 4th graders, you guys can start to learn how to play those band instruments when you go off to middle school. So having an awareness of where these pitches are is super important. Sorry for that little tangent. Let's come on back here. So this pitch right here, even though you can't sing it, and most of the instruments that I use can't play it, it's still important to know. So this is our low E, the E on the ledger line down below the staff. Okay? Now, one thing that gets a little bit tricky here is as you're looking at some of these pitches, like this, for example, if you just look at the staff and you just think, oh, okay, cool, ledger line down below the staff, middle C, you have to, absolutely have to check the clef from now on. Because we have started talking about both treble and bass clefs, if you don't check the clef, you are going to have a much harder time figuring out which pitch is which, because low E and middle C have two wildly different sounds. They're so much different that they're not even really able to be compared. So if you look at that and you think to yourself, well, it's the ledger line below, that makes it middle C. It's going to make your compositions, it's going to make your music, it's going to make your playing sound very, very off, because that's not a middle C right there. That's a low E. The same thing if we back up here just a moment to that pitch right there up above. Now, we learned about the attic, but that's not attic. That right there is the middle C. So the clef is what determines where those pitches are going to be and which ones they are going to be defined as, how it's going to function, and things like that. Okay? So even though I don't have a review card on here, a real quick review, we're going to kind of burn this down real fast here. So you've got your hand staff. Now, if you are looking at that and you're thinking about the 5 lines and the 4 spaces, you've got great big dragons fly around. Now, some of you have put on your checkout form that you were talking about every good boy does fine. Not right now. That's in a box and that's put away on the shelf. Okay? Great big dragons fly around. Then we've got all cows eat grass. Up above the staff, we've got our high B sitting on the top of the staff. The ledger line above goes to middle C. As we go down below, we have our low F underneath the bottom line, and then our low E on the ledger line down at the bottom. Okay? So we're going to head back and we are going to work on some self-check questions. We are going to try to figure all of this stuff out and identify some of those pitches. So let's get going here and let's try to see if we can identify which pitch is which.